For every Kamehameha and Final Flash in Dragon Ball, there's a Wolf Fang Fist or Dynamite Kick. In other words, while some of the techniques used throughout the franchise are powerful, destructive, and straight up awesome, there are just as many attacks, moves, or transformations that are weak, useless, or mostly ineffective. So, we're taking a look at the weakest techniques throughout all of Dragon Ball, and ranking them from somewhat effective to completely useless. Starting us off, we have a technique that some might not think is all that weak: the Spirit Bomb. The Spirit Bomb has been used all throughout Dragon Ball Z, and even in Dragon Ball Super, and although it was used to completely obliterate Kid Buu, it's actually not all that effective. The attack consists of gathering energy from one's surroundings, then throwing said energy at an opponent in a massive ball of destruction. Sounds pretty badass, right? You're not wrong, but think about how many times the Spirit Bomb has actually been effective. It's been used 5 times in total, including Trunks' Spirit Sword, with only 2 of these being effective enough to kill the target, a statistic that, combined with how long it takes to charge up the attack, makes the Spirit Bomb one of the least effective techniques in all of Dragon Ball. It's not the weakest attack by any means, but it's not the strongest either. Another not quite weak but still ineffective technique is Super Saiyan III Grade. No, we're not talking about Trunks or Goten. Get it? Because they're little kids. Go Super Saiyan? Yeah, it was a pretty bad joke. Anyway, we're talking about the form between Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan 2. This form is what happens when a Super Saiyan pushes past Super Saiyan by inflating their muscles with energy in order to massively increase their strength. Sounds pretty effective, right? Nope, it's actually completely useless due to the fact that all that extra muscle lowers the user's mobility and speed, making them an easy target for someone with superior agility. Future Trunks learned this lesson the hard way when he beefed up to Super Saiyan 3rd Grade in his fight with Cell, finding himself bested in speed by the bio-android. This made Trunks look rather dim-witted, since Goku and Vegeta quickly figured out the downside of the form, as well as Cell, who demonstrated the faults of inflated muscles to Trunks firsthand. Like the Spirit Bomb, the evil Containment Wave, or Mafuba, hasn't had the best track record in terms of effectiveness. It's been used a lot more than the Spirit Bomb, so the average rate of success is a bit higher, but overall, the Mafuba has only been effective less than half the time it's used. This is especially true whenever it's used in a moment of life or death. Think back to Dragon Ball when Master Roshi attempted to use it on King Piccolo like his master had done successfully many years prior. It failed, and he died as a result. Tien failed as well, and the technique was forgotten until Dragon Ball Super, where it was attempted on Zamasu, but once again failed. The only time it worked in the franchise was when Master Mutaito used it on King Piccolo, and when Master Roshi used it to eliminate fighters in the Tournament of Power. We had a bit of trouble ranking this one, and you can probably guess why. The final explosion was the self-destructive attack in the literal way, not the psychological way, that Vegeta used in an attempt to destroy Majin Buu before he could destroy the Earth. The attack consisted of Vegeta unleashing all of his Super Saiyan 2 energy at once, resulting in a massive explosion. While this sounds incredibly effective on paper, it failed to do anything to Majin Buu when Vegeta first used the technique. Well, Buu was splattered into pieces, but his regenerative abilities allowed him to reform, meaning all the attack did was kill Vegeta. It's a powerful attack indeed, especially since it was used effectively and with the survival of Vegeta later on in the Tournament of Power. But the risk involved and the 50% success rate makes the final explosion a relatively ineffective attack that probably shouldn't be used more than it already has. Vegeta wasn't the first character in Dragon Ball to self-destruct as a last resort to defeat a powerful foe, since Xiao Su did it before him during the Saiyan saga. It's actually kind of unfair. Vegeta is thought of as a hero for his final explosion, despite ending the lives of half the audience of the World Martial Arts Tournament prior to his death, while Xiao Su is thought of as useless for doing the exact same thing. We're of course referring to Xiao Su's attempt to kill Nappa with a self-detonating technique, one that ended up failing completely, by latching himself onto Nappa's back right on the spot that we all have trouble reaching when there's an itch to scratch, making him hard to get rid of. Xiao Su turned himself into a living bomb, exploding after saying goodbye to Tien via telekinesis. Unfortunately, the attack was completely ineffective, and Nappa emerged from the smoke unscathed, making Xiao Su's sacrificial attack one of the weakest in all of Dragon Ball. Next up, we have a technique that many may have forgotten about, or didn't know existed in the first place: Master Roshi's Thunder Shock Surprise. This technique involves shooting a lightning-like energy blast that shocks opponents and keeps them trapped in an electric field. This technique deserves some credit, as it's capable of killing and makes it very difficult for opponents to escape from the electrical field, but it's only been used a few times in the series and doesn't seem to be as effective against other superhuman opponents. Again, not the weakest technique in the franchise, but also nowhere near the strongest of all time, and because it falls in the lower tier of attacks, we're gonna rank it as number 15 on our list. Strangely enough, Piccolo's used a version of this attack throughout the course of the franchise, but even with his great power, it's still not that effective. Being able to make clones of yourself is definitely pretty useful, but in relation to the other, much stronger Dragon Ball techniques, its power doesn't quite compare. Known as the multi-form, this technique has been used by both Tien and Cell, but the former was the first to display the cloning ability. By splitting himself into 4 clones, Tien's able to overwhelm opponents and gain the upper hand. Useful, yes, but once you realize that each clone is only a quarter as strong as the fighter using it, it's easy to see how weak a technique it is. But we guess it does have the advantage of allowing one person to serve as an entire barbershop quartet. You think Tien has a good singing voice? We're getting off topic here. The point is that while having clones of oneself can be useful in quickly turning around a fight, the multi-form fails overall as a technique. Based on the name of this technique, you might think that it involves magic or summoning witches or some kind of dark art with a powerful effect, but that's not the case. Despite being called 4 witches, this technique involves growing 2 extra arms. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to us either. Maybe the name is a translation error, or maybe it's just part of Dragon Ball's weird naming conventions. But there are no witches involved in this technique, just 2 extra arms. The 4 witches was first used by Ten Shinhan in his match against Goku during the 22nd World Martial Arts Tournament. This match also showed how completely ineffective of a technique it is, since despite gathering up a ton of energy, Tien's 4 arms were easily combated by Goku simply moving his arms so fast that they functioned as 6 or 8. Yeah, if your technique can be beaten by a kid flapping his arms, then maybe it's a dud. Imagine if the boulder from Indiana Jones was a warrior. That's pretty much Mona from Universe 4, since her ability to turn the bottom half of her body into a huge orb makes her a dangerous obstacle to deal with. However, while this technique, known as expansion, which seems like a bit of a ripoff of Choji from Naruto, is useful and able to hold its own against a Super Saiyan, it's also a bit one note. This is to say that expansion just lets Mona roll. And that's it. As long as someone knows how to combat against a giant rolling obstacle, they're fine. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that the combatants of the Tournament of Power were forbidden from flying, most opponents could easily dodge a big rolling boulder of a fighter. Even if Mona's power increases with her size, there's no denying how useless this technique is against most warriors, especially those who can fly. Somewhat similar to Mona's expansion is Botamo Shield, which is less of a technique and more of Universe 6 warrior Botamo's natural ability. Botamo, who may or may not be a ripoff of Winnie the Pooh, comes from a race of aliens with soft, pliable bodies that can take an extensive amount of force without experiencing damage. The simple act of letting his elastic body take all of the force dealt to him is known as the Botamo Shield, and while it can be effective, the character's elimination in the Tournament of Power showed just how useless it is against a very strong opponent. Initially, Botamo was depicted as being tough to beat, since attacks couldn't do anything to him. But in the Tournament of Power, Gohan was able to knock him out by simply punching hard and fast enough to push Botamo closer and closer to the edge before eliminating him with a Kamehameha. We're not actually sure if you can classify tricking someone into taking a present disguised as a bomb as a technique, but it's close enough. And since the present for you attack was incorporated into a number of different Dragon Ball games, we think it's worth looking at. Mr. Satan is the first and only person to use this trick, originally utilizing it after failing to end Boo with poisoned chocolate, a task given to him by the people of Earth who still believed he was the warrior who defeated Cell. The exploding present, a handheld video game console, wasn't very successful, which is why it's in the top 10, or rather the bottom 10 in our ranking. Not only was the explosion ineffective in damaging Boo, but the villain also thought it was part of the game, calling what normally would be a deadly experience fun. We couldn't talk about the weakest techniques in Dragon Ball without including Yamcha's Wolf Fang Fist. Although the rush attack has gotten Yamcha through some tough battles, and it even managed to get the best of Goku once, it's still just a series of fast physical attacks. nothing more. In fact, the move was so useless that Yamcha ceased using it after Dragon Ball Z, only using it in the original series. While it has made appearances in video games, including Dragon Ball FighterZ, the Wolf Fang Fist has been defunct for quite some time, as even its creator has found it to be completely useless in a world of energy attacks and Super Saiyans. We don't think Yamcha's as weak as the memes make him out to be, since the self-destructing Cyberman that cemented his weak status only did so because he couldn't defeat Yamcha fair and square, but the Wolf Fang Fist is definitely a dud of a technique. As much as people may love Videl, us included, she's by experience alone on a lower power level than Yamcha or other lower-tier superhuman warriors. She knows how to fly, has a decent grasp on energy control, and is a highly skilled normal martial artist. But on the larger power scale of the franchise, she's pretty low. Now, that doesn't make her any less of a great character, since she could probably kick Yamcha's butt with nothing more than a glare. Since Videl is mostly a normal martial artist, her signature attack, the Eagle Kick, isn't all that effective, especially against the powered-up Spopovich, who recovered from the attack like it was nothing. Though Videl's able to give the Eagle Kick a bit more oomph by adding her flight to it, the move is ultimately one of the weaker techniques in the franchise. Of course, it's still much stronger than the signature attack of her father. There's no doubt that Videl's much stronger than her father, and as such, his signature technique, the Dynamite Kick, ranks lower than her Eagle Kick. The first time we saw the Dynamite Kick was at the beginning of the Cell games, when Mr. Satan stepped into the ring to prove himself against Cell. After legitimately winning the World Martial Arts Tournament fair and square, Mr. Satan had something of a big head, which combined with his love of theatrics and crowd-pleasing made him think he could take on the likes of Cell. After showing off a bit, Mr. Satan began attacking Cell with a flurry of kicks, which became known as his Dynamite Kick. But as we all know, these are just normal kicks, and as such, they really didn't do much aside from annoying Cell. Of course, Mr. Satan's news crew thought they were doing something, only to be shocked when the mustached martial artist was swatted away like a fly. Boy, was he swatted. This was another tough one to rank because while biting an opponent has never really done all that much damage in the history of Dragon Ball, it has actually served a purpose in a number of fights. Goku has never finished off an opponent with a bite, but he has managed to get the upper hand or get out of a tough situation by way of biting. Heck, he's even used it just to show he wasn't going to give up so easily, like when he bit King Piccolo after his limbs had been crippled. But at the end of the day, despite how useful biting has been to Goku, like when he decided to have a taste of Frieza's tail, it hasn't ever really done enough damage to be ranked on the same level as, say, Destructo Disc or the Masenko. Because of how useful it can be, biting is not in the bottom 5, but it's pretty close. One of Goku's earliest signature attacks was Rock, Scissors, and Paper, a 3-part rush attack that was invented by his adoptive grandfather. Grandpa Gohan's technique actually lives up to its name, as it consists of a rock-like fist, a scissor-like poke to both eyes, and a paper-like palm strike. The attack worked for the early comedy-focused days of Dragon Ball, since it's wonderfully slapstick. But as the franchise shifted more toward intense battles, the technique was done away with. And good riddance, we say, since while it was funny to see Goku pull the Dragon Ball equivalent of the Three Stooges bit, the attack isn't all that effective compared to other techniques of Goku's. But it would be funny to see Goku pull this on Frieza, just to see if he could. Remember that time Krillin forgot he didn't have a nose and almost lost to his super smelly opponent because his lack of hygiene made him too foul to attack? Yeah, early Dragon Ball was kinda weird, with Krillin's fight against Bacterian being one of the weirder parts. So what does this smelly fighter have to do with the weakest techniques in Dragon Ball? Well, Bacterian's smelliness was technically his main battle tactic, so his deliberate lack of bathing could be considered a technique, and a weak one at that. Although the smell was so incredibly pungent that everyone around Bacterian became sick to their stomachs, the tactic has no effect on opponents like Krillin, who have no nose. Additionally, a more seasoned fighter would likely be able to push past the smell to finish the fight. Not to mention that being so unclean probably left Bacterian with a shorter lifespan. So we wouldn't call smelliness an effective or smart battle tactic. Speaking of Krillin, the character is considered by many to be the strongest human in the Dragon Ball franchise, mainly because he developed the Destructo Disc and has held his own against some of the toughest villains throughout Dragon Ball Z, and Super. That said, Krillin also has one very weird and rather weak technique in his repertoire that was only used once, and comes in as number 3 in our ranking of weakest techniques. The technique in question is his balloon technique, the act of inflating his body with air as a means of slowing his descent, which is very strange for a lot of reasons. While anything is technically possible in the world of Dragon Ball, the world's leader is a talking dog after all, this part of Krillin's match with Goku has always seemed a bit strange and out of place. And aside from helping Krillin slow his fall to the ground, the balloon technique is pretty much useless. There's one other technique of Krillin's that unfortunately makes the list of weakest techniques. However, unlike his other attacks, this one was more of an empty-headed, misguided accident. We're of course talking about the time that Krillin threw a rock at Goku's head to see how strong and fast he was. This was after Goku had mastered holding his Super Saiyan form for a long period of time, staying transformed the days leading up to the Cell Games. In an attempt to see just how strong Goku was, Krillin chucked a rock at his head. And though it was pretty painful, Goku stating as much with angry yelling, this technique is still one of the weakest attacks in Dragon Ball history, which is why it baffles us that the rock throw became part of Krillin's arsenal in Dragon Ball FighterZ. Maybe we're just meant to properly utilize the move, but the rock throw may be the game's worst attack. Last and literally least, we have a technique that's been presented in the Dragon Ball franchise as long as there have been flashy fighters who love to put on a show, posing. We're not talking about battle stances, that's a legitimate way of readying oneself for battle. Nope, we're talking about any time a warrior has done a pose, or a series of poses in order to pump themselves up for battle, or in an attempt to intimidate their enemies. Everyone from the Ginyu Force to Gohan's Great Saiyaman persona has used poses to enhance their fighting, though it hardly, if ever, succeeds in doing anything more than making them look like a fool. Gohan especially, since nobody in the world of Dragon Ball thinks his posing is cool, but we kinda like it. Because of how little posing manages to do in a fight, we decided to rank it as the weakest technique in all of Dragon Ball. And those are some of the weakest techniques in all of Dragon Ball. Do you agree with our choices? Are any of these techniques actually super strong? Did we leave out any useless attacks? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more Dragon Ball videos. Thanks for watching.